Do you know who I am? Have you any idea who I am?
Greetings from Castle Goring, from Mickey, Aurora, and from me. Linda Harris says, the press is having a lull, so they twist a perfectly normal interview into a knot. Maybe they could put their energies into proving Rachel Meghan Markle gave birth to those kids. Well, wouldn't that be something? Oh, yes. Well, I'm not going to be unkind. I'm not going to say anything. Oh, but one or two things do spring to mind, none of which I'm going to fall into the pit with by saying, oh, I said this and that. The fact of the matter is that much of what is going on is also a deflection away from the fact that people have been questioning. And do you notice every time the subject of those children comes up and becomes intense, Meghan and Harry come up with some scheme to deflect attention away from it so that everybody's attention is diverted in the opposite direction? Well, that is a part of their motivation, doubtless. But another part of it is she is a publicity junkie. She needs the fix of attention. You only needed to look at her as she was embarked on the Zoolander walk to see that she was one step away from total spaced out. I am higher than a kite. I mean, the fact that she didn't achieve a cataclysmic climax of one sort or the other is quite extraordinary. But she now has to receive the Humanitarian of the Year award. I'm such a humanitarian. There was my father, according to Caroline Graham, to my sister in the texts that she sent her, asserting that Daddy was trapped on the 19th floor, because that is exactly what happened. I've seen the texts. So even though they then tried to make out that Samantha had over-egged the pudding, she never over-egged anything. I've seen the whole line of the texts. And we will leave it at that for the moment. But the fact of the matter is, why hasn't Meghan cut her father into even paying back some of the tremendous amount of money that he spent on her education? Why is he left on the 19th floor of an apartment building in Cebu, the Philippines, when even if she doesn't want to speak to him, she could give him a decent allowance? I know people who have given their parents allowances to whom they did not speak. I'm not going to mention any names, but more than one very famous person who felt, actually I will mention a name, Elton John. Even when Elton John wasn't speaking to his mother, he still maintained her in the style to which, as his mother, he quite rightly felt she was entitled to. I just make that point for what it's worth. R.J. Andrade says, Dear Lady C, could the possibility of wrongdoing by Harry in regards to his lawsuit be the overriding reason for his visit to the king, and thereby publicly reminding the judiciary of his royal connections? R.J. Andrade, that's a very good question to ask. And it would not surprise me if once David Sherborne realized that they had to hand over the emails and the texts, Harry, of course, managed to wipe his clean, but all of the others couldn't say that they had wiped theirs clean, nor could the solicitors say that they had wiped theirs clean in the when the discovery process required that they actually hand over their discussions with clients such as Sadie Frost and Sir Simon Hughes, the former Minister of Justice, who is a barrister. And so both of them will have known, certainly he will have known, that it is, shall we say, very questionable behavior to try to extend the statute of limitations with the fabrication of news stories that would not exist but for the fact that you had planted them. So it's a thin line between fabrication of evidence and fraud. I make that point for what it's worth. And if they think I'm being unfair, sue me. We'll argue it out in a court of law. They're not going to sue me. They know that everything I'm saying is true and fair. So, aside from the financial motivation involved, and why Harry and Meghan reputationally needed to re-establish the royal connection, R.J. Andrade, you could well be right. That could well have been a motivating factor. And for all we know, David Sherborne, who was clever enough to see that if he roped in Harry, this lawsuit would gain a revival that it would otherwise lack, and proceeded to do so with the connivance of Elton John and David Furnish, who's also another of the claimants. I'm sure they will have realized better get Harry over to England, and Harry better make sure that he sees Daddy. Not that Daddy is going to stop things, but that Mr. Justice Nicklin will hopefully remember that Harry and his daddy should actually be treated with kid gloves. Let's see if Mr. Justice Nicklin does that. Angel Mage says, could it be that this is the reason Harry told the judge a few months ago that he couldn't show the emails, text messages, etc. the court asked for, because everything, what a coincidence, was gone, deleted, to prevent the judge to see the proof that Harry knew and agreed to using that tactic to tackle the 6 years rule in this case. Harry deleted those messages for a very good reason. Harry is married to one of the top legal minds of all time. Rachel Zane, slap him once, slap him twice, slap him again. I'm Rachel Zane, and I'm a legal genius. So Harry doesn't only have the benefit of David Sherborne, who is the most senior junior barrister in this country, and whose brief fee alone runs nearly into 7 figures, and his daily refreshers are in the tens of thousands. And that's not even the hourly rate that needs to be considered, and the year, 2 or 3 that it takes for things to get to court. No wonder the case will cost £38 million if it goes to court. And David Sherborne gets his money, as do all of the other lawyers, whether they win or lose. The only way they don't get their money is if their clients lose and their clients go bust. And that means that the lawyers don't get the money. Otherwise, the lawyers get the money, whether the lawyers win or lose. And it's not only David Sherborne. There will be many other lawyers involved. Each side will have its juniors, its seniors, those are the barristers. It will also have, except of course for Harry, who will have at least 2 juniors, because David Sherborne always has a junior assisting him. So he's a junior, but he is the most senior junior, so he has. And as I've said before, I don't want David Sherborne to be booted out, just in case I should ever need him. I had George Carman, and I'll be delighted to have David Sherborne. Is this a setup? Is that why Harry deleted those emails? What other possible explanation could there be? But the fact that he did it because he knew if he didn't do it, he was going to be in huge trouble. Well, if he does it, he's not really in any trouble at all. I mean, Rebecca Vardy, she never ended up being charged with any crime. She never ended up in prison, nor did her associates, who not only deleted evidence, but actually threw it in the North Sea. And the judge made it absolutely clear, Mrs. Justice Stein, that she thought that Rebecca Vardy was a total liar, as were some of her colleagues. So nothing happens, I've said it time and again, in civil matters in this country, nothing happens unless, I would imagine, if I did something like that, because I represent the old order and because I have a profile that is not rabidly left-wing, they would doubtless throw the book at me. But otherwise, not a chance. Rosemary says, "Thank you, Lady C, for explaining how the head of the Commonwealth is elected. This Commonwealth citizen did not appreciate the late Queen appointing Harry and Meghan to anything connected to the Commonwealth, since they were so rude to us on the few excursions they made to Commonwealth countries." Rosemary, I think protesting by throwing hot tea is endowing people with one's presence, don't you? You think it's disrespectful? I'm sure certainly the person who would throw the tea would actually think that, well, even if I scorched you, you're lucky to be scorched by me. Arrogance of the highest order. If the Commonwealth head moves from the monarch, I see little point in continuing to support the Commonwealth, considering the absolute corruption that is rampant in some Commonwealth countries, from which a new head would presumably be elected. sorry, the head of the Commonwealth has to be the head of state of one of the states that is a member of the Commonwealth. That's the rule. Hence why Harry could never be elected head of the Commonwealth. Unless, of course, fingers crossed, one plane crashed. Pretty please. Yes, I make a joke of it because I think the whole thing is so ridiculous. So there's that. And what would happen if the British monarch were not head of the Commonwealth? Well, you have touched upon the reason why the British monarch has remained the head of the Commonwealth in recent times. The Queen was well known to be even-handed, not prejudiced, and scrupulous. Charles is known to be even-handed and scrupulous. They're not corrupt. The likelihood of getting, for any length of time, a head of the Commonwealth who would be as impartial and as honourable and as decent and as respectable as the British monarch is very remote. There is also the issue, which I would imagine at some point would have to be addressed, which would be if the head of the Commonwealth has to be the head of state, and that head of the Commonwealth ceases to be the head of state for whatever reason, there would have to be a new appointment made of another head of the Commonwealth. And the continuity involved with having the British monarch is invaluable, because they get to know the heads of the Commonwealth, of state as well as government, and deal with them accordingly. And it would be very odd if they elected a head of state who is a transient head of state, because then there would be, every few years, they'd have to be having a new head of state appointed, which would be very time consuming and would cause all sorts of debate, which would result not only in consensus, but cause no end of ill will in the meantime as they were arriving at a consensus. So for all those reasons, it has made sense up to now to have the British head of state as head of the Commonwealth. And I would imagine, unless they have another monarch as head of state, having a president for life would be endorsing dictatorship or the appearance of dictatorship. So there are all of those reasons that kick in, that will doubtless kick in again when the new head of the Commonwealth comes to be elected. And if you had a series of ineffectual heads of the Commonwealth, or bad heads of the Commonwealth, I mean, having some of the grossly corrupt heads of state as head of the Commonwealth would be farcical. But there are many who are not so pointedly avaricious. Some are, but not all are. But all of those problems would then kick in. So I hope that explains the way the Commonwealth head is nominated and how it is likely that William will become head of the Commonwealth, if only through default. If only through default. But he has been very modest about it and very clever about it. He has made the point that he is not expecting and not pushing himself forward, but doubtless if he is invited, which it makes sense that he will be invited, I would imagine he will be delighted to accept. It's a very important position in many ways. And if they have a series of bad heads of Commonwealth, the whole thing will disintegrate. In much the same way that the League of Nations disintegrated. So, I hope that answers the question. Faze says, I don't think Prince William will make too radical changes when he becomes king. He's savvy enough to appreciate the need to relate to young people, many of whom are not of British descent, so don't necessarily share the same loyalties that we older people have towards the crown. I think he will make a fantastic monarch. With regard to his feelings towards Harry, from personal experience, I learned that trust is very fragile and once broken is almost impossible to recover. We can forgive, but we never forget and will never again trust the person who has betrayed us to anything like the same extent as previously. That's very interesting. First of all, may I say, that's the way it should run, and that's the way it often runs. That's not the way it always runs. Eve and I will use myself and my mother as an example, even though I knew she was malignant, thoroughly unreliable. I never had her pegged as a thief until she stole money from my sisters and me. I couldn't imagine that our mother would trouser money that was supposed to be for us, or that she would actually end up selling property that was ours behind our back and without our knowledge, and some of which was sold so adversely that you wonder what planet she was on. Yeah, she was an alcoholic, but she always made sure that she came out on top. So that is badness, not madness, because if you're mad, you will actually end up screwing yourself. If you're bad, you'll somehow manage to end up screwing everybody else, but somehow emerging unscathed, if only relatively unscathed. So maybe William will be as stupid as I was, but I doubt it. You make some interesting points. You observe that William is not going to make too radical changes when he becomes king, because he's savvy enough to appreciate the need to relate to young people, many of whom are not of British descent, so don't necessarily share the same loyalties that we older people do towards the crown. May I point out that young people are traditionally far more radical than older people, irrespective. And my understanding is that young people never care that much about the status quo. They always think that it's better to change. So everybody starts out quite radical and ends up more conservative. But it's a misnomer to think that the British are more monarchist than some of the foreigners who are now living in this country. That's actually not so. Many of the colonials are far more monarchist. And I'm speaking about the ordinary colonials, not the grand colonials. Many of the more ordinary colonials are far more monarchist than many of the ordinary Brits. That's a fact. Even in Jamaica, people still revere the royal family. All the reports about the Catherine and William visit, which were spun by the media, partly at the instigation of Lisa Hanna, who was the deputy head of the opposition party. And I'm not going to go into it in any depth now, but the fact of the matter is the average Jamaican was absolutely thrilled to have William and Catherine there. And you only need to look at the photographs of the young people behind the fence. And incidentally, the fence was there not because of what the press were trying to spin it as, because all areas are fenced off when you have certain visits, and also some areas are always fenced off. And when they were pushing their hands through for William and Catherine to touch them, which they did, which was very nice, they were mostly young people. They weren't old. I make that point for what it's worth. And as long as William and Catherine are relatable to young people, and as long as they are presenting themselves as desirable individuals, and as long as, quite frankly, they're glamorous. Young people like glamour. Everybody likes glamour, unless they are radical left-wingers. Wingers, I should say. In which case, they do not like glamour. They love ordinariness. They love to strip away glamour. They love to strip away the beauty of life. They love to strip away pomp and circumstance. And once they do that, they have people under their absolute control, which is what happened in the Soviet Union. So, I make that point for what it's worth. Cow Eats Man says, anti-role modeling between siblings is a very important influence in families. One sibling modeling himself on what the other is not, forging a unique identity. At this point, may I say, it's called dividing up the roles amongst yourselves. This is seen a lot in the royal family. Take David and Albert, also known as King Edward VIII and King George VI. David was the more outgoing and less responsible brother, and Albert the less confident and more anxious brother. In the princesses, Elizabeth and Margaret, Elizabeth was the more serious and conscientious of the two. We see this anti-role modeling tendency in the late Queen's children. We see this with William and Harry, of course. Too early to tell with the Wales children, although Louis is earning a reputation for being the clownish one. Psychologists talk about role modeling, but they neglect the importance of anti-role modeling, which is just as important an influence. This is one reason social influencing campaigns have unexpected effects. That's a very, very wise and very interesting observation to have made. And I couldn't agree more. Siblings divide up the roles amongst themselves. One is the beauty, the other is the brain, the other is the artist, the other is the mechanic, the other is the engineer. They very seldom compete within the same sphere. When they do, they usually do it on different instruments. For instance, the Canu Mason family, they are a famous British Antiguan musical family. And they are pretty much all musicians. Shaku Chanu Mason is the most famous of them all, but they are all excellent musicians. I've heard them, and they are really brilliant. But they all play different instruments. They don't all play the same instrument. So even when they have a talent, they divide up the instruments amongst themselves. And this is a very interesting observation to have made. You call it anti-role modeling. I've never heard that expression before, but let's go with it because it's what, but not always siblings sort of, when they are dividing the roles amongst themselves, they don't always have an anti aspect to it. That, of course, is where conflict and rivalry comes in. That's the anti element to it. But it doesn't always have to be anti. I mean, I'll use a personal example. Within our family, my brother Mickey, who took his O levels at 14, normally you're 16 or 17, was known as the fool by my parents. I know it's ridiculous and I'm laughing, but it was very cruel. He was known as the fool. I was known as the genius. That's what they used to call me because I had a genius IQ. My sister Phoebe was known as the beauty. And my little sister Margaret was known as nothing because she was Daddy's favourite. But then, once we had grown up and Mickey became a barrister, then a solicitor, of course, because Mickey was the boy, Daddy would, I would say something. It happened time and again, even though I was supposed to be, as they said it, the genius. I would make a point in conversation, and it was totally ignored, especially if it was on anything worldly or political. But I would be totally ignored. Mickey, who knew that I was more intelligent than he was, would wait 5 or 10 minutes, make the same point in slightly different words. Daddy would nod. He said, oh, like it was a revelation, because Mickey had made the point. Phoebe and I, when we had grown up and I became known for my looks, not only privately, but publicly, because my sister Phoebe has never been in the public eye, but I was, and I was always referred to until I saw the newspapers as the beautiful. Uh, she didn't object to the fact that I was sharing the stage with her. She never displayed any jealousy whatsoever that I was so it's sometimes the roles get muddled up by the siblings themselves. But I certainly think where Harry and William are concerned, William was always the intelligent one and the stable one. And that was not them choosing the roles. That was that William was more intelligent. Harry has never been intelligent, and everybody knew it. Diana used to say Harry was as sick as she was. Harry's much sicker than she was. But neither of them was academic. But Harry had natural physical ability. Princess Anne has always said Harry would have made a superb professional athlete. He had physical ability. I'm not saying William doesn't have some, but William doesn't have that degree. So to that extent, none of that is choice. But the whole business in families is what is choice and what is assigned and what is inflicted and what is oppressed and rebelled against. And so I think the whole issue is one that's quite complex, but it's certainly worth looking into, because Diana, for instance, because her sisters Sarah and Jane were academically clever, as indeed was her brother Charles, and Diana had no tendency towards academia, but she certainly wasn't the fool that some people thought she was. She was extremely canny, and she was clever in street smart sort of way, in a way that Meghan is not. Meghan would like to think she is very clever and has street smarts. Meghan is a cack-handed operator, a small-time operator who's never been able to crack the glass ceiling of her ordinariness and doubtless her lack of intelligence. Well, Diana might not have been academically inclined, but she certainly cracked that glass ceiling time and time again, because every time she reached a glass ceiling, she burst through it and flourished at the level above. That takes a degree of enlightenment, and that takes a degree of realism, and that takes a degree of interactiveness and learning as you go along that is actually commendable. So, but you make an interesting point. As for the three Wales children, of course they're assigned different roles and they develop accordingly. But Charlotte evidently is very dominant. She is the Princess Anne of the family. And interestingly, both generations have only one sibling who's a girl. And in each of the families, the girl is the strongest personality. Will Louis end up being a clown? Well, nothing wrong with being a little bit of a clown, I think. It's good. And George doesn't have clownish tendencies. That's his natural attribute. Is it anti-role modeling? It could well be. Or it could be that they have not needed to divide up the roles amongst themselves because they have natural attributes. This is, of course, the wonderful thing about the human condition. It's not as simple and straightforward as people would like to believe it is. And even in analysis, there are shades of grey. And on that note, I'll say thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been of some interest to you. If it has, please keep the questions and comments coming in so I will know what you would like me to be addressing with you on your behalf. Thank you so much. Take good care. And if you have truly enjoyed this, would you care to like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell,